Okay, so good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vera Darel, and I'm the Executive Director of Australian Friends of Rambam. On behalf of the board of the Australian Friends of Rambam, I would like to welcome you all. I also would like to thank the partners for the second series of events, Meet the Experts. Dr. Ben Eli, President of Mizrahi Organization, Israel Australia Chamber of Commerce, Global Victoria, Maccabi Life, and Jewish Fox Center in Sydney. Rambam Healthcare Campus is a 1,000-bed world-class teaching hospital based in Haifa. The patient population is diverse, as Rambam is the major referral medical center for all of northern Israel, the Mediterranean region, and around the world. Rambam is respected internationally for its clinical services and innovation in medical technology. Australian Friends of Rambam was established to support Rambam Healthcare Campus. Our objective within the Australian community is to help to improve health, especially in these challenging times. We do this by conducting a range of health and wellness activities, utilizing local expertise and experts based at Rambam Healthcare Campus. We also facilitate research collaboration between Rambam and Australian medical research institutions. Now, as many of you probably heard, at the request of the Ministry of Health, Rambam Healthcare Campus became the only COVID-19 referral hospital for Northern Israel and has converted the underground emergency hospital from a parking garage into the country's largest COVID-19 treatment facility in order to meet the growing national need for additional dedicated treatment spaces. Now, I would like to invite you to watch a recent video which was released about a month ago, featuring our Director General of Rambam Healthcare Campus, Dr. Michael Halbertal.
COVID-19 patients. We have almost 7,000 new patients a day, and we see that the need for medical care is increasing all the time. This is why we have decided to open and facilitate the Sami Ofer Underground Hospital. This facility is 60 feet below ground level in -3. We'll be able to hold 770 patients with COVID-19. 170 of them are ventilated. We have in the facility regular wards, intensive care wards, pediatric wards, delivery rooms, and a solution for also all kinds of dialysis patients and all other patients. We will start by having somewhere around 120 patients. 30 of them are going to be ventilated. Might be unfortunate, but we have lucky that we have the facility to facilitate this extreme scenario. For the last couple of days, since we have decided to use the facility, hundreds of hospital staff work day and night to get this place ready to have the patients. And from now on, all the medical and allied professional people will continue, all the teams, to work with these patients. They will obviously be covered and protected, and will give the best medical treatment that can be given to a patient here. This is a huge challenge on the hospital. We do not know what the future will hold. We are closing now the doors of the underground parking lot, making this facility as a full hospital, and I suspect that we'll open the doors again within 6 months. We hope for the best, and we wish all our patients lots of health. Friends and supporters, you are partnering with us for so many years, always being next to us when we need. We need you now. This is a crucial time for us. And as you see around us, with the help that we got throughout the years, we have the solution. We continue to need your support.
So as you saw, we are running running an Australian emergency campaign in parallel with this need and request for global support. We would like to do our bit in Australia to help the people of Northern Israel and all of Israel. But we cannot do this alone, and we need as much support from our community and network as possible. We need ambassadors, champions, volunteers, match funders. We need people with passion and network who want to make a difference and who can help us to get the word out. We need organization, community groups, synagogues, giving circles, sports club to come together and participate as groups and teams. And ultimately, we need as many donors as we can, both large and small, as soon as possible. Please consider ways you might be able to help, support, and get involved, and reach out to Robin or myself or any of our board members to discuss further. Now, I would like to introduce our partner, Miriam Cyber, originally from Melbourne. Miriam moved to Israel in 2014. With a background in client management, business development, Miriam worked at Procter & Gamble and in Australia before joining the startup ecosystem team in Israel. As an account manager for a local unicorn, she was the face of innovative Israeli products, working with enterprise customers across Europe. Miriam is now based at the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office in Tel Aviv in the role of Melbourne Biomedical Director, working with the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce. And Miriam looks to identify and drive collaboration between Israel and Victoria across research, commercialization, and innovations.
Thank you, Vered. As Vered mentioned, I'm from Melbourne, so firstly, hi, Mum. It's an honor to be here today representing my home state, together with the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce, Global Victoria, and our recently appointed Victorian Commissioner to Europe and Israel, Tim Dillon. Naturally, we see a lot of collaboration and connection between Australia and Israel through people and research. Our vision, therefore, is to take that personal connection and bring it to an institute level. So we thank Vered and Australian Friends of Rambam for their hard work, bringing together such really unique and interesting and exciting institutes. 2020 has presented a global crisis and challenge. But if I might note that as we've seen since the establishment of the State of Israel, together with the evolution of the startup ecosystem, it is often through crisis and vulnerability and challenge that we do see creativity, innovation, and collaboration. It's been very interesting and inspiring to watch Professor Zimmet's career, as well as his work across COVID-19 and diabetes. So together with global leaders like Professor Naim, Shehadeh, so we look forward to hearing more. But first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Danny Lamb, AM, President of Mizrahi Australia, Deputy Chairman of World Mizrahi, Chairman Aliyah and Rescue Committee Jaffe, Member of Extended WZO Executive, Immediate Past President Zionist Federation of Australia, and Past President of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Miriam. And I think it's entirely appropriate that you were the one to introduce me, given your background as being a Mizrahi girl in Melbourne. So well done, Vered. And to President Robin Schiffman of the Friends of Rambam, you made a fantastic appointment in Vered, who's just doing an outstanding job for Rambam. I want to just say how impressed I was to see Michael Halbertal's presentation of the change of car park into an outstanding unit below the hospital, and we can only hope that the need for that unit will dissipate over time. On behalf of Mizrahi is the leading Orthodox community in Australia, and actually an exemplar of religious Zionism around the world. We're the parent body of the B'nai Akiva youth movement, biggest youth movement. We're the parent body of Yavneh College for Emunah and for the Torah Metzion. And we are the lead body of Mizrahi institutions in Australia which represent Perth, Sydney and Melbourne. And I was delighted to be able to accept the invitation from Vered to be a partner in this very important Circle of Health program, which is what we're fundamentally want to see, which is, as we embrace Rosh Hashanah, we look for a healthy new year, and institutions like Rambam are the ones who should provide it. It's my pleasure and my honor to introduce our moderator tonight. He wasn't selected because his first name is Danny. It's just a chance. But Dr. Danny Ben Eli, an emergency physician and trauma consultant at Monash Health and Alfred Health. He graduated from the Rappaport Faculty of Medicine at the Technion in Haifa in 1993, but has been living and working in Melbourne since 1996. As a senior clinician, Dr. Ben Eli is involved in emergency medicine and trauma education in Melbourne, Israel, and China. Wow, maybe we should talk about what's going on in China, or maybe not. He's also involved in a number of community initiatives, including the Australian Friends of Rambam, the Chevra Hatzalah, who do such great work in an emergency situation, and the Jewish Community Council of Victoria's Youth and Alcohol Program. Without any further ado, Dr. Ben Eli, bevakasha.
Thank you very much, Danny, for the kind introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. It is a pleasure to moderate this evening with two very distinguished speakers. Before I present the first guest, I would like to just go through a few housekeeping rules. We ask that all questions will be posted on the Q&A section. That's the Q&A button at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending which device you are using. I won't be able to monitor the chat. There will be an allocated time for questions and answers, and we will try to go through as many as we can. If you can please keep your microphones muted at all times. We won't allow questions to be asked using your voice, so please use the Q&A button. We will aim to conclude the evening as close to time as possible. Without further ado, I would like to present our first guest, who is known to many of you, Professor Paul Zimmet. Paul is a professor of diabetes at Monash University. He is also co-director of the Sagor Family Center for Epigenetics of Aging and Diabetes at the Tel Aviv Medical Center. He is honorary president of the International Diabetes Federation and has an outstanding international record in diabetes and obesity research, particularly in epidemiology and public health. His research has predicted and charted the evolving global epidemic of type 2 diabetes. He has published over 1,000 papers and is listed in Clarivate, 2018, the world's most influential scientific minds, as one of 400 scientists in the section of clinical medicine internationally. In 2014, Paul was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Tel Aviv University in Israel. He is also an honorary member of the Israeli Diabetes Association. He has many other international and national awards, including the Professor A.M. Cohen Memorial Award Lecture in Jerusalem at the 2000 European Association for Diabetes Congress. He is also an officer of the Order of Australia for Distinguished Services to Medicine, Nutrition, and the biotechnology industry. Without further ado, Paul, the stage is yours.
I'll just unmute yourself.
I'm just doing that.
Okay, that's it.
And up here we go. And where we go. I'm going to have to go back a little bit. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Danny. It's lovely to see Miriam and Danny number 2 here from my hometown. I'm going to talk to you about a very unusual situation. 2 pandemics in collision. One, diabetes is a chronic disorder. COVID-19 is a communicable disease, and coming together, they've created a double mess almost for the situation that we're in at the moment. Diabetes, as you'll see from the first slide here, the numbers have increased by about 55% over the last 22 years to nearly 600 million. And I've argued for many years now, I predicted there would be an epidemic of diabetes. I argued it was arguably the largest epidemic in human history. But if we go back to another coronavirus epidemic, there is clearly a real challenger there, and that was the Spanish flu that took place in 1918, when 1/3 of the world population were affected and 50 million people died. While there are probably more people with diabetes, but that's a chronic thing in any case, against the 40 million or so worldwide of COVID, there's much less mortality, thank goodness, in diabetes. So in 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic took place. This is a nice cartoon, which I'll come back to in the next slide, about how they went about tackling the problem, which in many ways we are using the technologies from and lessons, maybe not as well as they actually did in one sense. And the little medal down there is the 100th anniversary in 2019 of the end of the Spanish flu. So I have some, gosh. So this here shows you that colorful character, and my lovely sister-in-law, Annabella Gutworth, did some Spanish translations for me. And you can see this guy, he's got a fan, mask, he's got things in his hand, so he's telling people, don't excuse me for not shaking hands with you. He's got signs here, keep your distance. There's fumigation going on with this thing in the in his hand. He's got respirators, all sorts of gimmicks, including some medical things, mint and camphor and quinoa, fine cinnamon. They were trying it out then. Somehow the cigar got in the way, and I think this is probably a bottle of whiskey in his pocket. But certainly these are the sort of strategies that we used at the time in the situation. This is just some notices, a public notice, and this is in Kelowna in Canada, and the sort of things that Daniel Andrews here in Victoria is trying to do, keeping people not going to the churches. It doesn't say synagogue, but it says theatres, moving picture halls, pool rooms, and other places. Telling people at that time in 1918, don't be going to public gatherings. And over here we have a family all in their masks, and as my son Hendrik pointed out, even the cat is wearing a mask. They had lockdowns. These gentlemen going to their local cafe can't go in because of the lockdown. And now some just over 20 years afterwards, we've had a lockdown here in Victoria. Here's probably the main intersection in Melbourne city area. Can't see anyone, police on guard there, to send people home if they're still up at past 7 o'clock in the evening. That lockdown only just stopped a few weeks ago, or a few days, a week or so ago, and it's probably the only lockdown in history of Victoria. Right at the beginning of when the pandemic hit Australia, one of our diabetes organisations in this state put up this sign saying that there was no evidence that people with diabetes are at more risk of contracting COVID, and just said, you know, keep up good hygiene, follow advice from the experts. I didn't believe that, actually, and Professor Shehadeh is going to mention it, maybe a different situation in Israel, but certainly from our experience, people with diabetes were only likely to get into trouble. Type 2 diabetes patients, elderly with high blood sugars, poor control, were much more likely to contract the complications of diabetes. And you can see COVID too from this picture here of this gentle person. Is a disorder which affects many organs, the brain, the kidneys, the liver, the stomach, heart, diabetes, as we're mentioning, and dermatological conditions as well. And we, in our early days, having met COVID only 6 months ago or so, and not really knowing the longer term effects that may hang in there, and that's something I'll mention towards the end of the presentation. Victoria, we started off fabulously. You can see here, March to April, very low numbers, and we thought, oh, this is an easy game. Well, come June, and there was the second wave. Only just over the last week or two have we actually got the numbers down. And here you see in 30th of July, there were 723 people at the top of the second wave. In middle of August, it was down to 303. Whoops, sorry. And oops, so I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back here a little bit. And you can see here, the latest numbers only a few days ago have been one day there were no cases. The last few days there are 3 or 4. We are praying at the moment that we're not going to have another wave of the magnitude that we've been seeing in a number of European and Asian countries, and certainly in the United States. Well, that phenomenon of seeing 1 or 2 diabetics who had just had COVID communicated to me by emails from, one was from New Zealand, another one was from Finland, triggered the idea that we should be starting to look at seeing whether COVID itself was causing diabetes. And it was not just that if you had diabetes that was poorly controlled or managed, then you might get the COVID. And we heard about one case, a type 1 diabetes, and associated with that case, there was evidence that the pancreas had been hit by this virus. The virus got into the body, into the pancreas, and here a nice pinkish color is what a normal human pancreas looks like, and in here are the cells that make insulin among some other secretory cells. And here was the pancreas of someone who actually died with type 1 diabetes and COVID, and you can see the lovely normal pattern destroyed in this person. Well, just very quickly, I'll explain this. Whyalla is a town, a small city in the south of the middle of Australia, in the southern area. And the first report that a team that I was working with mentioning that coronavirus might trigger diabetes was on their local news, in their local newspaper. Funnily enough, that is the town I was brought up some 70 years ago. I left it when I was 8 years old. Came back the memories of that, and those memories relate to the fact that my parents fled Poland as the Nazis moved in, came to Australia. My father, who had a medical degree, wasn't recognized here, had to do medicine again, and then he was sent to this little town of Whyalla, and that's where we were brought up, our family. And here was the first report of our study on the coronavirus triggering diabetes was actually in that town. A number of new cases were coming to our notice, so a small group of people from Monash University, led by myself and someone from King's College in London, decided to publish an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the most prestigious journals, as you would know, about the fact that we had established this COVID Diab registry, which is now operating to collect data from all around the world on trying to work out how many new cases of diabetes are coming from coronavirus. We have got centers in Latin America, in Asia, the UK, Europe, and indeed it's now starting to accumulate data. So we will be able to see, number one, whether there are more people with diabetes emerging from COVID, more than we would have expected in any case, but it will also give us a database to monitor these people for many years to see to what extent new cases of diabetes may evolve, which may disappear, and understand better the mechanism of how coronavirus is causing the diabetes to help with the design of appropriate new drugs. Another aspect of the pandemic I wanted to mention is the question which Professor Shehadeh will discuss in much more detail, and that is that the lockdowns and other aspects of the pandemic have a very serious effect on mental health. The numbers of people suiciding, certainly in Victoria, have been noted, in other parts of Australia, and I'm assured it's the same around the world. And why am I interested in the circadian story? Well, the brain has a little center in the, in the brain is a small center, a little clock is in there, which is influenced by light and day and our circadian rhythm, and it controls our body clock. And in every major cell in the body, we have here heart, liver, pancreas, fatty tissue, stomach, are little clocks all synchronized against the main body clock. Now, why do we have a body clock? And Albert Einstein came up with one of his usually good stories and solutions. He says, the only reason for time is that so that everything doesn't happen at once. You can't go, for example, to the toilet at the same time you're trying to eat. And anyhow, we've all got rhythms we've developed. If we've got a lifestyle which involves the usual activities of work, regular meals, etc., etc. And this body clock has been knocked around badly by COVID, by the epidemic. So I'm sorry, we have a problem here of taking this forward. Well, we'll go here. The reason why I'm interested in circadian rhythm is, and it comes to a little gerbil in the Negev Desert. It's called the Israeli sand rat. And that sand rat is the best model of human type 2 diabetes. take it out of the desert, put it into a laboratory in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. It gets diabetes, type 2 diabetes, it gets fat, it gets depression, it gets sleep disturbance, gets a fatty liver, it gets circadian dysrhythmia, all of the features we see in human type 2 diabetes. And I've been collaborating with Professor Kronfeld-Shaw at Tel Aviv University, who's interested in this gerbil. And I told her, well, it's the food they get when they come, it's a Western rat food, when they get to Tel Aviv or to Jerusalem. And she said to me, no, Paul, you haven't got a clue about this. It's because their circadian rhythm gets disturbed from the change in the environment, and then they get these other disorders like diabetes and obesity. And it's a very simple lesson which actually does apply now that we're in this pandemic to humans, how their body clock gets disturbed by certain things which I'm sure Professor Shehadeh is going to go into more detail about. So the circadian rhythm story is an important one. There's a beautiful book, The Circadian Code, by Sachin Panda, and he points out that your health depends on when you eat, when you sleep, when you exercise, when you work, and the environment you're in, like we are in right now with the pandemic and all the restrictions and such like. And believe it or not, long before Sachin Panda came up with this message, a very famous physician and a religious person, Maimonides, came up with the points that I've shown here, that overeating is like poison to the body. Most illnesses are caused by gorging oneself and overeating even healthy foods. That exercise is the cornerstone in the preservation of health, repelling the damage done by most of man's bad habits. And happiness alone has cured, or at least made milder, many physical and psychological ailments. So many centuries ago, the very things that we need to be looking at right now with the peoples whose mental health and lifestyles are affected by this pandemic were in Rambam's mind and written at that time. So finally, the long-term effects of COVID-19 are still not understood. We've only been with it for about 6 months, 7 months, and it's predicted that there's going to be lasting misery for people who've been infected, even if they haven't had major complications yet. These may occur in months and years ahead. A beautiful article by in Nature 2 weeks ago, the last misery of coronavirus long haulers predicted that there will be brain, heart, lung, liver, other complications. There's a lot of smart people around telling us all about COVID and how bad it is and what it can do and what it can't do and what's safe. And I call on the statement of Donald Rumsfeld, who many of you will remember was the US Secretary of Defense. And back in 2002, he said, there are known knowns. These are things we know that we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. These are things we don't know we don't know. And this is the problem with this virus that has caused this COVID-19 pandemic. And I would have to say that right now, we're all in a position that we have to do all of the things to stop another wave, certainly in Australia or in Israel. All those things, the social isolation, the healthy, quarantine issue, exercise, social distancing and such like, and all do what I actually did right at the beginning. People got very unhappy. They wanted to hit me in the street when I was walking around saying, please, physical distance, live longer. We're doing it, why don't you? I got a lot of abuse. Be humble, that's the first thing. This is a very clever virus. We still don't know how long it's going to be with us, whether we can actually get rid of it. And unfortunately, we may have to rely on Superman actually to provide us with the final victory. Who knows? So I want to thank you very much for being part of this. You're going to hear a very nice presentation now from Professor Shehadeh, who's going to actually amplify the magnitude of the problem, the people who are at risk, and the essential strategies.
Well, thank you very, very much for your amazing talk. If anybody has any questions, we will take questions at the end after Professor Shehadeh's talk. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Naim Shehadeh. He is the director of the Institute of Diabetes, Endocrinology and Metabolism at Rambam Medical Center. Professor Shehadeh is an endocrinologist. He graduated from the Rappaport Faculty of Medicine at the Technion at Rambam Medical Center in Haifa. He completed postgraduate research training also at the Barbara Davis Center for the Study of Diabetes in Denver, Colorado in the United States. Professor Shehadeh's main research and clinical interests are pathogenesis and prevention of type 1 diabetes, diabetes complications and prevention trials, intervention programs, including a community project for prevention of obesity and diabetes in high-risk communities. And he was also involved in the development of a new infant formula that was enriched with bioactive hormones such as insulin. He has a long list of awards and honors. He received the Herschel Rich Award from the Technion twice, once in 2002 for a project of human insulin additive for infant formulas, and in 2008 for a project called a novel biomarker for autoimmune diabetes. He was nominated as an outstanding lecturer through many student surveys in the Bruce Rappaport Faculty of Medicine in the Technion in 2000, 2005, 2006, and 2007. I unfortunately was too old to enjoy his teachings. He got the Raymond and Miriam Klein Prize for research regarding the development of the new infant formula enriched with insulin in 2006. Professor Shehadeh, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing your excellent talk.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Paul, for a nice presentation. Thank you, Danny, for your kind introduction. Good evening, everybody. I am very pleased and honored to participate in this important event. So this is Rambam, and this is the Rambam. And I'll start with a short definition. The name of the disease is coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19. The name of the virus is severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2. I will address the diabetics as a high-risk group. I will also talk why they are in high-risk group. And I will finish with general recommendation for everybody and especially for diabetic patients. So diabetic patients as a high-risk group, older adults and people with pre-existing medical conditions, including diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, pulmonary disorders, and obesity all are considered as high-risk group for COVID-19 morbidity and mortality. The first, publication came from China, from Wuhan, and the small series of 26 fatalities show that 42% of them were diabetics. Moreover, it's known that it has been demonstrated that the number of comorbidities in diabetic patients is a significant predictor for mortality, and again, in a very big numbers, we can see that mortality in diabetic patients is threefold higher than regular population. It has been shown in the past, 20 years ago, that if a diabetic patient have a pulmonary disease, and if we maintain glucose level between 100 and 150, this, good control is associated with lowest mortality rate. It is 20 years ago, and now again, poor glycemic control in patients with COVID-19 and pre-existing type 2 diabetes was associated with worse outcome. Here we can see the poor control patient, and in the upper line we can see the well-controlled patient, and you can see the difference in the mortality between the two groups. So this is the light in the tunnel, that if we keep good metabolic control, we can reduce mortality and morbidity. So I can summarize from the ADA, and Paul already mentioned that, and I agree with them. In some population, we really see that diabetic patients are more likely, more prone to be infected. In Israel, our data show that people with diabetes are not more likely to get it, but a lot of published data have showed that increased severity and mortality in people with diabetes. And the good thing, that good metabolic control reduces morbidity and mortality. This is numbers from Rambam. We have almost 900 hospitalized patients during the COVID-19 period, and in our data, about 30% of them were diabetics, and about 50% of the mortalities and the severe cases were also diabetics. So diabetes is a real risk factor with higher mortality rate and higher morbidity rate. So why diabetes is risky? We know since many years that diabetes affects the immune system. The immune system is very important to struggle against the invading virus. So the T lymphocytes, Y cells response is reduced. The neutrophil response is also reduced. Some disorder in immune and antibodies in the body. We have a depressed antioxidant system. We have diabetics have hypercoagulability state. Hypercoagulation is an important risk factor that leads to a lot of comorbidity and complications in COVID-19. Moreover, where they have higher levels of IL-6, which is a cytokine that leads and promotes inflammation. And you all heard about the cytokine storm or immune storm, a lot of cytokines that can lead to comorbidity in these patients. So I can summarize why diabetics are at high risk group. First of all, dysfunction of the immune system. They are in oxidative stress. They have micro and macro vascular complication, the hypercoagulability state, and also related disorders. Most of our diabetics are older patients above the age of 60. They have high rates of obesity, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, kidney disease, fatty liver, pulmonary problems. So all these help that or leads that the COVID-19 causes severe disease and higher rates of mortality. I here want to emphasize the importance of preventing obesity. These are young patients with COVID between the age of 18 and 49. As you can see, obesity was the major coexisting comorbidity that led to hospitalization and led to deterioration in severe cases. So to preventing obesity is a very important issue in COVID-19. And now I come to general recommendation. As Paul mentioned, there is some challenges for diabetic patients during COVID-19 lockdown. First of all, stress. And when we are stressed, we have higher adrenaline, higher levels of cortisol, and we lose our control on diabetes. The other thing is food and eating habits. You know, patient in lockdown, food is available 24/7. And when you are stressed and you have food all around, you start to eat even you are not hungry. The other thing is a decrease in physical activity. You are staying at home and there is a less physical activity. Also restricted follow-up. Your connection to your outpatient clinic, to see your dietitian, to visit the clinic and talk to your physician is limited and restricted. So all these are major challenges for diabetic patients. So a general recommendation, always, but especially now, is that we should know that diabetics are at high risk to lose glycemic control during lockdown, and controlling glucose levels is very important. So treatment should be intensified when control is lost. And when choosing treatment, we should choose simple, effective treatment. And now a lot of telemedicine platforms are developed. We are contacting our patients by telemedicine while they are staying at home. We can contact them, see their results of glucose levels, change or intensify their treatment. And this is in Israel now is very common and very successful procedure to control our patient while they are staying at home. Another thing, how should we prepare ourselves to ease the COVID-19 if we get infected? As I said, and I mention it again, we should achieve optimal metabolic control. We should continue with healthy diet, rich in antioxidants. We are lucky to have that Mediterranean diet in Israel. A lot of vegetables, a lot of olive oil, fish, nuts, etc. Vitamins. Vitamin D is very essential, and I will talk a little bit about it. It's very important, not just for calcium and bone building. It looks that it's important also for the regulation of the immune system. Vitamin C and zinc. Physical activity. And before COVID-19, we talked about physical activity to get better metabolic control, to lower glucose level, and to prevent obesity. Moreover, physical activity is very important for the work and the activity of our immune system. By doing physical activity, we are strengthening our immune system to prevent COVID-19. And also, as I mentioned, it's very important to prevent obesity. This is a small study from Israel, from Kupat Cholim, published in Ben Gurion University. that show a high significant correlation between prevalence of vitamin D deficiency and COVID-19 incidence. So if anyone have low level of vitamin D, it's important to add it, and it will help, but also to add it to a normal level, not to get vitamin D intoxication. This is a nice paper just published several months ago. We always meet, and you always see in the media, that some young patients have developed a very severe disease. They got into intensive care unit, into ECMO, and on the other hand, we can see some normal youngs that are very resistant to develop the disease. And this article talks about why we have some very prone patients to severe diseases and others are resistant while they are young and have no comorbidities. And the bottom line is our genetics. Our genetics affect our immune system and how we can deal with this important virus. And I want to finish with a very short comparison between COVID-19 and influenza. The first thing about what we call it incubation period, the time between we get the virus until we can see the symptoms. In influenza, the incubation period is very short, between 1 to 4 days, while in COVID-19, it's between 2 and 14 days. And this is why we keep the people who get contact with the COVID-19 patient to be in isolation for 14 days. Until 14 days, we can see the new symptoms of patient. What about infectability? COVID-19 is very infectious, more than influenza. Transmission is very similar. It is by droplets. This is the main, way of transmission of the viruses. Onset, the influenza is usually abrupt onset, while in COVID-19 it's slower. Symptoms in influenza, we get a lot of sneezing and rhinorrhea, while in COVID-19 we have more, throat ache, we have muscle ache, we have a cough and respiratory symptoms. Hospitalization is much higher in COVID-19. Mortality is much higher in COVID-19. And on the other hand, we have a treatment and vaccine for influenza, while in COVID-19, we just started to see some treatments, remdesivir antiviral, monoclonal antibody, etc. But yet we don't have a vaccination. And another thing, we see we see influenza in the winter time, while COVID, it's all over the year. It's not affected by summer, winter, spring, etc. It's all over the year. And this are very important differences to show that COVID-19 is a very serious, and we should take it very seriously to prevent its transmission. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Naim, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Really very interesting. We are running a bit late. We have time for a couple of questions. I'll start off with the first one. This is a question by Jeff Sidner from Eastern Kilda. Does being a super fit 73-year-old person enable one to approach the resistance young people seem to naturally have for the privations of COVID-19?
I didn't get the question, please, Danny.
I will repeat it. Does being a very fit 73-year-old person allow one to approach the resistance that young people seem to have for COVID-19?
If I understand the questions correctly, everybody should keep the distance and not approach anybody with the disease. If we are in a good fitness and young, and we are eating probably with, you know, all Mediterranean food, physical activity, vitamin C, vitamin D is normal, it will be very difficult for us to get infected. But it's not a rule. It is, you should continue to keep our all the instruction, hygiene and social distancing. This is the important things.
Paul, do you have any anything to add to this?
Very, very little. I think that it's there's a lot we still don't know. They say young people, some young people aren't going to get it, and so I think the main thing to do is to do all the things that are told by the public health people to reduce your chance of getting COVID, and that's really the best defense.
Excellent. We'll move on to the next question, which is interesting and a little bit more technical medically. This was addressed to Paul. Why do you think we see so much diabetes ketoacidosis in COVID-19 patients who are newly diagnosed with diabetes? Is it the lactic acidosis from hypoxemia or insulin deficiency type 1 diabetes like? The majority appear to have a type 2 diabetes phenotype. Also, the disease onset appears to be too fast for autoimmune significant beta cell destruction.
Look, I can only answer this very quickly. We actually don't know what the mechanisms are. We clearly, there's an enzyme called ACE2, which is in the pancreas and it's in the lung. And somehow the virus uses the metabolic pathway of that to get into those tissues. And that's one of the main causes of the destructive lung disease. And certainly there are cases where we get destruction of the insulin producing cells because they've got ACE2 as well. Why we get so much diabetic ketoacidosis has been shown in people who got diabetes and people who develop newly diagnosed diabetes in intensive care units, that when they need insulin, they need huge amounts of insulin. And it may be it's actually resistance of the tissues to insulin, but equally so as Joel Sonstein, who I think is probably a bigger expert than I am, thinks, it could certainly be the insulin deficiency. I don't know what Professor Shehadeh says.
I totally agree. I totally agree. You know, yeah. The COVID, the virus attacks also beta cells, and also the stress, the counter-regulatory hormones are very high. All these are the, agree totally. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to one more question. This is directed to you, Naim. Professor Shehadeh, you mentioned droplets, but isn't aerosol transmission important, an important means of transmission? Also, what about the virus staying on surfaces for days?
Yes, I agree. I mentioned the droplets as the main thing, but we discovered later that aerosols are very important also transmission way. Now we stopped inhalations in our small clinic for asthmatic patients. So aerosol, droplets, and also solid surfaces. The virus can stay at the solid surface for days and weeks even. So all of these are very important. I agree, yes.
Okay, there's a question here, and I'm not sure if I will be projecting what was asked, but I will try. This is from John Lockwood. I agree with all said. Eventually, it will be restricted eventually or morph into another strain, nothing like the black flu destruction. Diabetes increases regardless, however. And here in Australia, especially amongst indigenous diabetes, how do we support Rambam in the answer, and how can Rambam support us? Can Rambam assist us here? I might start off with Paul, and then we'll move on to Naim.
Oh, I'm not sure that I can answer that. It's more a question for Berit, I think, who's helping run the show.
Naim, do you have any anything that you can contribute to answer this question?
No, I think very short.
Well,
Okay.
what I could say is that our indigenous community, as the Australians listen here on the Zooms know, and potentially the Israelis, there does appear to be ethnic differences in risk of getting a COVID infection. And it appears that our indigenous community, fortunately, appear maybe to be more resistant to getting COVID infections. It may also be the environment they live in the open spaces and such like. But that question is something that we still have to answer. One of the hundreds of questions we still have to answer until we understand COVID.
One of the things that I can say from my experience is one of the last doctors that's from Melbourne or from outside of Alice Springs that has left Alice Springs on the last flight in March from Alice Springs to Melbourne. The Northern Territory have been very, very strict and very, very good in tightening up their borders and closing things up very quickly even before other states.
Yeah.
And thus preventing any spread into the indigenous camps and preventing and having one of the lowest rates of disease in the world. I'm just going to try and see. Henry Zimmet has one question that might be the last question. Hi, Henry. Diabetic survivors of COVID-19, is glycemic control in these patients more difficult post-COVID compared to pre-COVID? And that's from Dr. Henry Zimmet.
I'd give it to Naim, I think.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of patients post-COVID with diabetes, and I don't have a research work on that, but my impression that some of them became harder to control after COVID, and I think the main reason for that, what Paul has mentioned, that beta cells have the ACE receptors also, and some of them get infected in the pancreas and get, reduction in the beta cell mass, and their ability to produce and secrete insulin is going down. So a little portion of these patients become very hard to get a good control, and we have to intensify their treatment with insulin and other medications.
Paul, do you have anything to add to this?
I'm fine. Maybe next week, when we do another session on diabetes, we can set aside a few more minutes. There might be some new knowledge we get in this time about COVID that we can communicate.
Excellent. With this question, I would like to end the evening. Before I hand over to Vered, I would like to thank both Professor Shehadeh and Professor Zimmet for donating and contributing their time to the Australian Friends of Rambam and allowing us to be part of their daily quest and research into the effects of COVID-19 onto diabetes. So thank you very much, and I wish we could give a virtual round of applause for both presenters and for their excellent presentations. I'd like to hand over to Vered now to give us a bit more details about next week's event, again with Professor Zimmet and Professor Shehadeh. So Vered, back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dani Ben Eli. And thank you for our panelists. Thank you, Professor Paul Zimmet. Thank you, Professor Naim Shehadeh. And thank you for our collaborative partners, Mizrahi, Dr. Dani Lam, and the Jewish Fox Center, and Global Victoria, Maccabi Life, and the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us. Now, before that, I'll tell you about our next session. John, for your question, sorry. We are bringing knowledge and information like we're doing now. So this is our first step in helping all communities in Australia. And with the hope, maybe we can do some research together on that topic. We're actually working on something like we're doing in other areas, and maybe then we can help even more. Now for the next session will be on the 29th of October, which is next Thursday at the same time at 7. And not just to make sure with those that came from Israel, it's going to be this time at 10 a.m. in the morning and not at 11, because we have 9 hours difference. So just bear in mind. And our next session will be on the topic of diabetes and obesity. It's double trouble with Professor Zimmet and Professor Shehadeh. And that's about it. I would like to thank you all for attending, and I'll see you all the next week. This session is recorded, so if some of you want to see it again, not an issue, just email me. I'll put my email here on the chat, and actually you have it. And you can watch it again, and you can share it. And that's it. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.